Welcome to Unit 12. My husband is pretty used to the College Board's odd choices by now. He hears me complain about them often enough. But when I told him that we had only 2 Impressionist paintings on the list, one of which is not entirely characteristic of Impressionism, he was genuinely shocked. "But those are the paintings people flock to museums to see," he sputtered. "They keep art museums open." Okay, I agree with him, no surprise. But I also worry that the widespread familiarity and popularity of Impressionist paintings makes it hard to look at these works with the eye of art historians. We know them too well, and for us they have lost all power to shock. You'll feel shocked, I predict, by some of the works you'll see in our final unit. But from our 21st century perspective, it's hard to see why the Academy turned its nose up at the Impressionists, why these artists needed first a salon de refusés and then their own Impressionist exhibits. The term Impressionist takes its name from this painting by Claude Monet. It was intended as an insult, not a compliment, but the school of painters loosely associated with this term quickly embraced the name and gave that title to the exhibitions that they held for their salon-rejected paintings. In this painting, which is also not a required work, we see the most characteristic feature of Monet's painting, the preoccupation with capturing a precise moment of space and time with its original unique light and the colors that this light produce. It's precisely because the world was moving so quickly, because change was the order of the day, that Impressionists sought to freeze, change in a moment, and capture change over time. Alas, we're going to have to move all too quickly through the Impressionists, but let's see a little more Monet in this introductory clip from Sister Wendy. Note that she kicks off with our friend Olympia and Monet's leadership of this new artistic movement. I don't think there's any better example of the Impressionist fascination with the transient effects of light and atmospheric change than Monet's Rouen Cathedral series. Monet painted more than 30 views of Rouen Cathedral at different times of day, in different light, and in different weather. The building itself, while ornate and fanciful, is very, very solid, but in Monet's paintings it dissolves into light and atmosphere. So, let's turn to our first recorded work of the unit. Here we see the same formal characteristics that show up in almost all of Monet's works. Again, that transitory play of light, in this case filtered through steam, loose brushstrokes and heavy application of paint, and the many somewhat startling colors used to capture steam, a range of blues, pinks, violets, tans, grays, whites, blacks, and even yellows. The Lazare station was, in fact, part of a series of 12 paintings that Monet made of this railroad station, and one of only 2 was painted in sunlight. Here's another, not painted in sunlight. And still another. And here is the other version of the Lazare station that captures the scene in sun. For those of us accustomed to appreciating Monet's paintings of his spectacular garden, those glorious water lilies, the choice of a railroad station as a subject may seem rather strange. But in fact, we've already seen trains featured in romantic landscapes, right? Both of these artists saw trains as transformative, powerful, and strangely beautiful. It's important to remember just how stunningly the availability of rail transport changed the life of people in the 19th century. With the advent of the railroad, travel was not just a pleasure available only to the wealthy. Ordinary people could now take to the rails to visit family and friends, or to explore new landscapes. Trains made it possible for Parisians, or New Yorkers, or Londoners to commute to the city to work from newly created suburbs. Trains made it much easier for artists to travel from the city to the countryside to paint en plein air, or out of doors. Further aided, as Sister Wendy mentioned, by the invention of portable easels and pre-mixed paint in tubes. Monet was also influenced by another new technology, photography. If you think about it, photographs, like Impressionist paintings, capture a transitory moment in time, and of course they're all about light. This is not a required work, but I really wanted to include another Impressionist painting in this lecture, and this one's a favorite. If the application of color in Impressionist paintings sometimes seems a little random, actually it's not. Impressionists benefited from scientific advances in optics and in color theory. They understood, as earlier artists did not, that white light was made up of all the colors in the spectrum. So, for example, Impressionist artists abandoned the old idea that the shadow of an object was made up from the color of that object with some brown or black mixed in. Instead, they enlivened their canvases with a new idea, the new discovery, that the shadow of any color could be mixed from pure hues and broken up with its opposite or complementary color. So, for example, the shadow on a yellow surface could have some strokes of purple painted in to increase the painting's vitality. Let's watch a short video clip that gives some excellent close-ups of this work and also talks about the brushwork employed not only by Renoir, but by Monet and many other Impressionists. Art was still mostly a man's world in the late 19th century Europe and America, but two notable female Impressionist painters captured the intimacy of family life, especially relations between mother and child, in beautiful and evocative paintings. Here you see a work by the artist who did not make the list. And here's a work by the artist who did make the cut, though not this work. Note how this painting, and our required work is not a painting, captures a variety of patterns. The oil painters of the Northern Renaissance were fascinated by fabric textures. Late 19th and early 20th century painters were often fascinated by patterns. We'll see this again when we come to Matisse and Klimt, and here again, this is influenced by Japanese woodblock prints, so often the correct answer in questions from this period. Mary Cassatt was one of the many artists who was deeply influenced by Japanese woodblock prints. Another painter who drew inspiration from this source was Edgar Degas, a friend and mentor of Mary Cassatt's, who has also dropped off the list. Note, by the way, that both Mary Cassatt and Edgar Degas use line more sharply than some other Impressionists. Again, this partly shows the Japanese woodblock influence. Oh, just one more Degas before we get back to the list. Degas is most famous for his paintings and sculptures of dancers. Note that while his paintings rely more heavily on line than Monet's do, Degas still captures dappled light with loose brushstrokes. You'll recognize one of those summary slides I've gotten from another teacher. No need to scribble furiously. This information is included in your workbook. But this is the kind of information you would want to include in an essay on one of our Impressionist works. And here is our next required work, and our other Impressionist work by an artist whose style differed rather significantly from Monet and Renoir. Note the technique. This is not a painting. Mary Cassatt was, as you read, committed to creating art that ordinary people could enjoy and afford, and that meant prints. Do you remember what artists we've studied used the same combination of print techniques? Goya in the Disasters of War series. So on this side, I've paired a required image with a Japanese ukiyo-e print on a similar theme. Note that both works feature mirrors. Like other Impressionist works, the coiffure is capturing a transitory moment, using that word a lot, aren't I? But in other important ways, the form of this work is quite different. The color palette is much more limited, and the colors themselves are much less bright and saturated than the colors in the paintings we've seen from Monet and Renoir. The forms are flattened and clearly delineated by the line that Monet in Lazare Station almost erases. In my next lecture, I will move on to a group of artists who both build on and partly reject the work of the Impressionists.